For backstory, I am a male and grew up poor in a janky lower-class neighborhood in rural NC. I was the quiet loner type, still am. My mother was single and worked 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. on weekdays, so I was home alone during those hours in the summers and after school during the school year. I had an older sister, but she was always busy with her social life away from home. When I was young, around 10 or 11, I was playing in my front yard under a dogwood tree that sits by the street. Out of nowhere, I hear someone speaking right behind me. Startled, I turn around to see a much older teen, 18 or so, that I had never seen before, standing literally 2 feet from me. I wasn't big on conversation, even with people I knew, so the fact that this guy was a stranger had me super stoic. He started asking me random things like,
"Do you got a Nintendo?"
And
"What kind of cartridges you got?"
Uncomfortable, I made up an excuse to leave and ran back to the house. A few days later, I was in the kitchen getting a cup of juice after school. I reached into the fridge, grabbed the grape juice carton, and barely had it out of the fridge when I heard the door handle of the back door jiggle. The back door was 8 feet away from me, as it was located in the kitchen beside the washing machine. I started pouring the juice into my cup when, suddenly, the door swings open, and standing there staring at me in the doorway is the strange guy from a few days earlier, knife in hand. We were both frozen, me in fear, and him seemingly surprised to see someone in the house. We locked eyes for what felt like minutes, but was only a few seconds, long enough for me to overfill my cup until the juice started flowing out onto the counter. Just as quickly as he had opened the door, he turned to head back outside and slammed the door behind him. No words were exchanged. I watched him casually walk past the kitchen window and back towards the street. Fast forward a little while to when my family had returned home from church on a Sunday afternoon. Nothing was obvious at first, but after we had been home a bit, my sister discovered that the back window of her bedroom was cracked open and the screen had been cut. To make this shorter, some items were stolen from our house, including jewelry, my bike, and not my Nintendo, but the AC adapter for my Nintendo, just so I wouldn't be able to play it anymore. My mom called the cops, and I was able to find a picture of the stranger in my older sister's high school yearbook. Turns out, he was wanted for stealing equipment from an office building in town, as well as a string of other crimes, including assault. It took a while, probably 6 months, but the cops actually came back to our house and returned one of my mom's rings and my Nintendo power cable. I know this story isn't the scariest, but as a little kid, it was terrifying. I slept with glass bottles against the doors for months after that. In my early 20s, I landed a receptionist job in a sales office at a manufactured housing community. It was my first office job after working in a daycare and the food and drink industry. I was so excited. I greeted potential buyers, set up appointments, and staged the spec homes with our stock of furniture and decorations. I worked with one other person in the office who was a salesman. When he was out of the office, I took potential buyers through our spec homes and gathered their information for follow-up. I was working alone one day when a customer came into the office looking to potentially purchase his first home. I gathered some information from the young man and asked if he would like to look at some spec homes. As we walked down the sidewalk towards the row of spec homes, we chatted about the various floor plans and finishes available. I knew the product information, and I had no trouble confidently answering his questions. He was friendly and reminded me of a classmate from high school that had played offense on the football team. I decided to show him the 2 home models that best fit his price range and desired floor plan. Since I shared most of the technical information during the first home tour, I gave him some space to freely look around the second home. He walked through the main living area and stopped in the doorway to one of the back bedrooms. He called out,
"Hey, what is this back here?"
and pointed to the corner of the room that I couldn't see from where I was standing. I knew these floor plans by heart, so I politely answered that it was a closet. In my mind, I was sarcastically thinking, "Really? You don't know what a closet is?" He chuckled and asked again.
"No, really, come here. What is this back here?"
I could tell by his tone that he was pressuring me to come see for myself. He motioned for me to come closer and take a look. His tone was friendly, but his request didn't make sense, so I paused. And in that split second, something shifted. Maybe it was the energy in the air, the hairs on my neck standing straight up, or the way his eyes changed before me. I suddenly sensed the power dynamic had shifted. I did not feel safe. With all of the lightheartedness I could muster, I repeated, "Oh, it's a closet. Excuse me for a moment. I need to check on something outside." I quickly made my exit back to the sidewalk outside the house. I had no concrete reason for why I felt the overwhelming need to leave the house immediately. I didn't understand why my body sensed danger. I just knew I needed to act quickly. Over the next few days, the young man came back into the office to meet with a salesman. He filled out all the various paperwork needed to purchase a home and live within the community. He dropped by several more times unannounced to check on his application status. If I wasn't there, he would ask the salesman when I worked next. My coworker thought I had a not-so-secret admirer. I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling something wasn't right. So on the nights I worked alone, I locked the office door. A few days later, corporate sent back their analysis of the young man's application and completed background check. He had been denied. The background check revealed multiple SA convictions, and there it was, crystal clear, undeniable 20/20 hindsight. The salesman called the customer right away to let him know his application had been denied and that we could not do anything further for him. A few days later, the young man decided to come back to the office one more time. When my coworker saw the young man's vehicle turn into our parking lot, he told me to go to the back room of the office where I would be out of sight. And just like the times before, the young man entered the office, asking if I was working. This time, he was met by a very angry, 6-foot salesman that had nothing to lose. I had never heard my coworker raise his voice before, but on that day, his voice shook the office walls. Needless to say, the young man never came by again, and I wasn't scheduled to work alone nearly as often. I was 24 female with a 2-year-old son whose father had relapsed on drugs and got us evicted after blowing through every dime of savings we had. Shamefully, we went back to live at my parents' house while I worked to get back on my feet. I should add, they live in an upper middle-class neighborhood on the good side of our city and had lived there for almost 20 years at this point. The night before this incident, I was quite restless and couldn't sleep. So I went downstairs in hopes that watching murder mysteries on the living room TV would lull me to dreamland. Yes, I am that type. My father, always a worrier, double-checked all the windows, locks, and ensured that the garage door was closed, as he did every night. My mother and siblings would often tease him of this, since we felt extremely safe and comfortable in that neighborhood. He went to bed, and I ended up falling asleep on the couch. I was awoken the next morning to the sounds of my father in the kitchen, preparing to leave for work. I got myself and my son dressed and prepared to depart for work as well. My father proceeded to head to his car in the garage and noticed that the garage door was fully opened. Frustrated, he turned to me and told me to always be sure the garage door is down. I figured he must have forgotten to check it the night before, and shrugged it off. Since my parents utilized the garage to park their 2 vehicles, I had to park my car on the street at the end of a curved driveway. There was very little visibility of my car from the garage entrance. I pick up my son and head out the door to go to work. As I'm approaching my car, I notice a person is sitting in the driver's seat of my vehicle. I will add that I often left my car open in case my son's now homeless father needed shelter from the rain or cold. He could lay in there. Of course, I naturally think it's him. I open the passenger side door and lean in, expecting him to welcome me and beg for a ride somewhere. Instead, I see a very large and rough-looking man, startled awake and stare blankly at me. In shock, I tell him to get the hell out of my car. He then tells me it's his car and to get in so he can give me a ride. Still holding my son, I start to scream at the man, who proceeded to move across the front as if to grab me. At this time, a neighbor is coming down my street in their vehicle, presumably on their way to work. I hail him down, point to the man, and tell him to call the police, to which he does. I finally came to my senses and realize I need to get my son away from this situation, so I retreat back inside the house and wait for the cops to arrive. The man must have come to his senses as the cops were being called too, because he ended up fleeing the car and crossing through some property to a parallel street in the neighborhood. The cops arrived and were unable to locate him, following the direction he went. They were then notified on radio that a car had just been stolen from a neighbor on that street. There's our guy. He ended up locating him inside the vehicle a few miles away and apprehended him. Now, finding a strange man in your car is certainly odd, but here's where the story gets creepier. The police discovered several items on the man that were stolen from various homes in the neighborhood. They also knew of him from historical arrests, inclusive of drug and rape convictions. During questioning, the man revealed that he was working with 2 accomplices, and they were essentially going house to house and stealing from unlocked cars, etc. The man stated the other 2 men had split away from him, and he proceeded to get into my unlocked car, where he passed out until found. Remember how the garage door was open the morning of, thus pissing my father off? I had a push-button garage opener on the car visor, and the man opened the garage intending to come inside the house. The couch I was sleeping on was only 10 feet maximum from the door that led out from the house to the garage. Who knows how the events would have unfolded if he didn't pass out and made it into my house. Lesson learned. Don't date guys that need you to leave your car unlocked for shelter.